This week we'll be looking at Chapter 5, and that's looking at the functional performance later in life. So this will really build off Chapter 3 in distinguishing the aging process from that disease process, and Chapter 4 looking at some of those cognitive functions as we age. So this is a little bit more applicable perspective on functional performance later in life. As we're looking at some of the issues associated with aging on the body, it's important to note that every body system is affected by aging. However, some are more closely associated with functional ability and independence than other. It's also important to note that each individual will age in a slightly different manner, so some things might come sooner than others, depending on the person that it is, and the severity of those aging effects is going to differ from person to person as well. On this slide, you'll see some of those key areas that we'll look at that experience some of the most dramatic functional changes as we age. These are the ones that have some of the larger impacts on us for independence and functionality. So those major categories are our senses: sight, hearing, taste and smell. Some of the physical changes like range of motion, strength, and endurance, and then our sleep patterns as well. So you can mouse over those buttons there and see what kind of categories we'll be looking at in this lecture. We're going to start by looking at our vision. And so we've looked at this a little bit in Chapter 3, distinguishing the aging process from the disease process, but we'll dig into it just a little bit more in this chapter. Here are some of those general vision losses that we expect to see with the aging process, and that's sensitivity to light, visual processing speed, and that's how quickly you can recognize something that you're seeing, whether it's a word or a face. The ability to see well in dim light starts to diminish. We tend to have more near vision, and we have a harder time seeing further away. And then some color sensitivity diminishes as well, so it might be a little harder to distinguish between hues of colors as it did previously. However, we do maintain basic color vision and the ability to maintain fixation of a target. So our eyes can still focus, we can still see basic colors as we age, and we tend to see that pretty consistently through our aging process. Now we'll look at some of those eye conditions that are more associated with the disease process and have a little bit more dramatic effect on our functionality. So you can see a normal eye to the left there, and then an eye with cataracts on the right. And you can even see that the actual eye looks cloudy, and so you can imagine how that clouds your vision and your ability to see. So cataracts in your text is noted as the most common vision condition that we see in older adults. So we do see this one quite often. The good thing is that there is surgery to remove those cataract lenses, and that is quite common to help cope with that vision impairment. Another common eye condition is macular degeneration. And again, you can see the normal vision on your left and then the macular degeneration simulation on the right. And the thing with macular degeneration is it really focuses on the central vision. So a lot of times that's where you naturally look to recognize faces and reading, and so it's really gets you right at the core of your vision. And so you can imagine the detrimental impacts of this, of not being able to recognize friends and family, and what kind of then social implications that can lead to. The last specific eye condition that we'll focus on is diabetic retinopathy. I chose this one to focus on because we're seeing such increased rates of diabetes, and it's thought that after having diabetes for 7 years, there's a good chance that you're going to start to have some vision impairments associated with diabetes. So here is, again, a normal vision versus diabetic retinopathy, and you'll see that there's spots that block vision, and these aren't going to be in consistent places, and it doesn't always, it's not always there. So your vision could be fine in the morning, and then by the afternoon, depending on blood sugar, you could develop these blotches. So then it starts getting into, do you really have eye problems? Or are you making it up? Sometimes you can see, sometimes you can't. And that can start to put strains on relationships and a safety factor. If you don't know to expect to have your vision there or not there, and you want to remain independent, you can plan on it being there. And then your diabetic retinopathy kicks in throughout the day and really hinders you of completing that task if you're out and about, trying to drive, something like that. So it can be really serious and has its own set of other issues associated with it. Luckily, we have several ways to compensate for certain vision issues, the most common being corrective lenses. However, we do see that older adults often still complain of visual issues, even when wearing corrective lenses. Another common one is just using large print. So instead of needing extra glasses or magnifying glass, we can just provide large print, and it takes a lot of strain off the eye. We can use visual scanning techniques, which help strengthen and enhance the vision that you do have left to help with that recognition and deal with some of those other issues associated with aging and vision. Simple things, if we have trouble seeing in dim light, we can add more task lighting or avoid driving at night, so more of that self-regulation to avoid those times whenever you experience more vision issues. And also we can avoid using really reflective materials that might create glares when there's more sensitivity to light. And that also can help be helped with yellow film glasses as well. Out of all of our senses, losing vision is more closely associated with mental health issues than some of our other losses that we experience while aging. So we see people with vision issues are 2 to 5 times more likely to experience depression. And this isn't necessarily related to how bad the vision issue is. It's just based on more so the coping mechanism, the prognosis that's associated with that, and how the person identifies with that vision issue, how badly they think it is. Here's a good visual to show you how vision impairment can lead to depression. So we can start with vision loss that leads to a loss of mobility. Maybe it's harder to get around your house, go out and drive, which then leads to a loss of independence. And this is something that we really hold value to as human beings. We've been independent the majority of our life at this point, and to have that taken away often is a real blow to mental health and stability. But that loss of independence can lead to a loss of the ability to drive and losing again something that's so held highly to an individual. That independence, getting somewhere you need to go, really can lead to depression once that's lost. So it really is kind of a vicious cycle. Whenever that vision and those senses start to go, we really see it lead to other health issues. Now we're just going to briefly look at hearing and just kind of see some statistics on how many people are affected by hearing. And hearing does decrease with age, but it also is really affected by environment and events that you were exposed to through your adult years and growing up. So what kind of work that you were you in a loud machine shop most of your life working? Did you go to loud concerts? Things like that can have a real impact on your hearing as you get older. So what we see is about 30% of people 65 and older have some sort of hearing loss. And this can also lead to those things like social isolation. If you can imagine, if you become hard of hearing and you're starting to rely on more visual cues, body language, or lip reading to help you with hearing, and some of those other senses are disappearing too, it really makes it hard to communicate with people. Or if you're talking on the phone, again, you don't have those other cues to help you, and so you stop talking on the phone as often, stop socializing as often. We kind of see that same cycle of isolation that could lead to depression as well. And one of the best ways we found to help aid or compensate for hearing loss is really to eliminate the background noise. So that interferes a lot with the sound that we're trying to hear. So if we can eliminate some of that or eliminate some of the echo or bad acoustics in a room, a lot of times that will alleviate some of the issues with hearing. Now we'll look at some of those issues associated with the declined sense of smell and taste. So we see that smell and taste are also closely linked to psychological implications like depression and withdrawal. If you could imagine how important food is to our culture, to experiencing time with our family, and if you all of a sudden can't smell that food or it doesn't taste the way it once did, you start losing enjoyment in that and can begin to withdraw from some of those situations because it's just not as enjoyable as it used to be. Now, experiencing some of those, that can also lead to different physical implications, such as a lack of interest in food, which means a loss of body weight perhaps, malnutrition, which can all be pretty serious health concerns for older adults. And we see that malnutrition, while it's not all that common in those dwelling in the community, we really do see high rates of malnutrition in those that are in facilities and hospitals. And we'll talk more about that nutrition piece in Chapter 7. Besides having some physical implications, we really see some serious safety implications of losing smell and taste as well. Specifically smell. You're less likely to smell smoke, which is one of our soonest indicators of a fire taking place. And you're also less likely to smell gas from natural gas if a stove was left on or there happens to be a leak in the house. And so what we might rely on then is smoke alarms, like many of us do. However, if your hearing is impaired, you're not going to hear those smoke alarms as easily. And another issue is that perhaps you take out your hearing aids at night whenever you're sleeping, and that would be an oftentimes that you're not as alert to be aware of a fire situation. So there are some real safety concerns here as well. With taste and smell, oftentimes we're not seeing these declines until individuals are in their 70s or later. However, most of the time they don't realize that there is a decline in those senses. There was a study done that older adults were asked if they have a decline in taste or smell, and 77% of them responded no, but through testing were determined to actually have declines in taste and smell. So they might not know what's going on when food doesn't seem to be tasting as good as it used to, or some of these other things that they rely on with taste and smell aren't quite right, but they don't realize it's actually a diminished sense in those taste and smell receptors. Now we'll look at some of the physical changes and how they affect our performance, more related to the musculoskeletal system. And those key areas are range of motion, strength, and endurance. When we're looking at range of motion, some of the real common areas of reduced range of motion occur in the shoulder, hip, and wrists. And some of this can be natural aging process, and some of it can be related more so to arthritis, which is one of the more common conditions in older adults. And we have various forms of arthritis, but the most common form is osteoarthritis, and that's more the wear and tear arthritis. So just being an active individual, even just regular movement throughout life, can have wear and tear on your joints, and we see a lot of that. So there'll be some inflammation in those joints that are commonly used, which reduce that range of motion. We also can see reduced range of motion through Parkinson's disease and just general muscle disuse. So if you start using those muscles, you start losing them, and so that range of motion is going to start decreasing. We tend to see just a reduction in muscle strength, which is pretty common. However, with exercise, that really can be maintained for quite some time, and there's very little strength reduction when it's actively being maintained. And lastly, we'll look at endurance, and a reduction in endurance is also common. However, it is less noticeable than reduced strength is as you age. As I began alluding to in the previous slide, that exercise can dramatically slow the course of physiologic aging. It is really important if you want to maintain mobility, independence, strength, that exercise becomes a regular routine any stage in life. And most older adults are quite capable of performing exercise, and it might be adapted to their specific needs and capabilities, but it is 100% achievable in most cases. We see things like arthritis improves. Even if it might be painful, it starts improving with exercise. It tends to restore balance. We see improved heart health, helps people remain active in many sports, which are great social outlets, helps build new neurons, and of course, it can help improve those things like endurance, strength, and range of motion. Talking more about exercise, I can't reiterate enough how important maintaining that physical activity is to maintaining general physical capabilities as you age. And cycling is a great sport and form of exercise that you can take into your old age, but it's great as you're younger. And I've had several experiences with cycling in older adults. I've rode with a group of older men all over the age of 60, some in their 80s and 90s, who ride every single week of their life, both in the gym and on the road, but just as their casual exercise outing and social outing. And they ride 30 to 40 miles, which is really impressive. I also am part of a women's bicycling event, and half the participants this year were women over the age of 50, and a lot of them were new to cycling. They were looking for some kind of physical activity that they could enjoy at their current age, and something that would keep them healthy and active for the next decades to come, which was really cool to see that they were wanting to pick this up midway through their life. And you can also see here that there's all sorts of bikes that are very adaptable to different needs. So you see in the top left corner that recumbent bike. So perhaps you have a bad hip or a bad back, and maybe something like the recumbent bike would be more beneficial for you, or a very upright bike, as seen by the couple cycling there. And then the other two are probably more race type fast bikes, which maybe are a little bit harder on the body, but if you're strong enough to support that, go for it. I wanted to reiterate again that the possible outcome of social withdrawal and isolation can occur if things like range of motion, strength, and endurance aren't addressed, because you can see how easily those can lead to decreased mobility and independence and social interactions. And just to highlight how important those social interactions are for people at any age, and how important they are to maintaining health, and not just physical health, but social and mental health as well. Praxis may be a new term, but it's a term used to describe a maintenance of normal activity and purposeful motor actions. And so our goal in aging would, of course, to avoid dyspraxia as much as possible, or apraxia. And these things don't come overnight with normal aging. These would be a slow process that perhaps we would have decreased ability to plan or execute those purposeful movements. So we have a lot of ways that we can slow that process down, or even halt a lot of that process. However, with certain health events, we might see this happen overnight, say with a stroke. And in that case, we would have some very prescribed rehabilitation programs to kind of get us closer to that normal praxis that we would like to see. Another way to look at functional performance is looking at the reaction time and the use of motor skills in older adults. So we do know reaction time does start to increase in the sense of it takes longer to react to an event. That might be to respond to brake lights in front of you and being able to stop your vehicle, or to catch yourself once you start falling or have a trip. So we do start to see some more falls in older adults, and these don't happen right at the age of 65. And of course, as we've mentioned before, everybody does age at a different rate. We typically don't start seeing these really increasing or these heavy declines until closer to 70s and even 80s. It is interesting to note, though, that we do retain a lot of the fine motor skills, and fine motor skills are more associated with typing and writing, knitting, crocheting, things like that that use those finer set of skills. And so a lot of those hobbies can be maintained throughout older age, not relying on those major muscle growths to some of those finer ones. These can also then relate to work performance, so being able to do a lot
now
of
digging
those
into a little bit more of that actual functional performance,
older adult life,
we can look at a couple different things. We can look at reaction time, which we do know that does
as well as fewer workplace
so
injuries.
It does take a little bit longer for older adults to react
often assume
to
leadership roles,
whether it's
to
braking after seeing taillights or trying to correct after a fall.
So the key thing here is not
related
to
job
older age.
So I know we've touched on
necessarily see these
but
things,
just to reiterate it again,
in the 60s or sometimes even not in the 70s, but closer to the 80s, we might start to see more across the board. Sleep can have a major impact on your health and functionality as well. So the importance of sleep is to help rejuvenate your body. It also, that's the time whenever you solidify those memories. So sleep is really important for new thought, to heal your body. And if those things aren't happening, those can lead to then more severe decline. What we find is that there are more sleep disturbances as you age. In a study of 55 and over 50% of those people complained of poor sleep at least a couple times per week. We do see some more common sleep disorders in older adults, and that could be insomnia, which is a fairly generic term of sleep issues, but more specifically we see some obstructive sleep apnea, and that could be from weight or other various health conditions, but when the trachea closes on itself when you're sleeping to stop breathing, and also restless leg syndrome are some of those disorders we see. Now there are things that we can do to improve our sleep, and these are recommended for any age of people, but good sleep hygiene habits, getting on a schedule, only using your bed for sleep and sex, avoid spending time reading in it, doing homework, doing things that are not involve sleep, because then your brain thinks that, oh, this is a place just to relax or to get work done, and it confuses it for that place of sleep. Some of the other reasons for common sleep disturbances in older adults might be from different medications they're on, and also just some general pain, whether it be arthritis or other health conditions, may leave them a little bit more likely to awake during those lighter portions of the sleep cycle. So in summary, you should have an idea now how to work with individuals that have some diminished sensory or functional skills throughout a variety of body systems, and be able to list some recommendations to help cope with those diminished senses. Also, you should have an idea of some of these sleep disturbances, sleep patterns that we see in older adults, and be able to discuss some of those sleep hygiene techniques with them as well. And one more thing very important to note is that perceptual skills in older adults are much more likely to be affected by disease than by the typical aging process. So more of that functional decline or decline in our senses is more likely to be caused by disease than that typical aging process.